everyone, and welcome to the 28th episode of When the Heart Leads. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Newborough, founder of Books of Eden Publishing, and I am incandescent to be with you all today. This 28th episode is called Visionaries of the New Earth, and this one feels, let's just take that in for a second. Visionaries of the New Earth. Wow. This one feels big. I have an announcement in this episode and also kind of some context for the announcement and why it's happening now. So I want to take a moment just to step back. I am the founder of Books of Eden Publishing, and I started this company a couple of years ago. I started in 2021, and I'd had a vision for it while I was traveling. Traveling through France and Scotland. And the idea of this company was that it would publish sacred texts that brought into reality, into consciousness, the new ways of being that are evolving on Earth. And the time has come now for me to throw open the doors of Books of Eden Publishing, and I am stating it here publicly. I'm also going to have a follow-up newsletter with more details, so if you are interested in being a Books of Eden author, and as you listen, if this sounds like you or sounds like a message that you have, I suggest signing up for the newsletter, because I'll have more instructions there, kind of what I'm working with, who I'm working with, and what it is that we publish. But I want to start by reading the vision statement, because up until now, this company has been me publishing my own books, and a big part of that has been really anchoring, embodying that deep message of the new Eden within me. And I needed to fully understand that process of creation before I could begin to work with others on it. But now, as I'm working on my third book, and as the pathways are really anchoring in me, I suddenly realized that it's time. And there were a couple things that I'll go through in this episode. There were a couple of things that really nudged me into understanding that it was really time. It was really time to throw open the doors of Books of Eden and really invite in these authors, these writers, these visionaries. And I want to begin by reading the vision statement of the company, of Books of Eden Publishing. And it's the first thing you see on the website. So the website is booksofeden.com. So if you want to read along or you want to look at it with me, you can go there. But here is the vision statement. Our authors speak the language of the divine in its many forms. They are the authentic seers, mystics, visionaries, oracles, and embodied dreamers of the new earth, the new Eden that is dawning. And then there is a word of welcome. So it's really time. And I want to mention the four things that we publish. So I say we, because it feels like a we, even though it's been kind of, this whole time it's been really me working on this company, designing it, developing it. It feels like a we, because it feels like there's a number of people gathering now who are ready to share these sacred texts of their heart, these sacred texts of their soul. And so I've articulated kind of four things that we publish, and it's relatively broad. It can be broadly interpreted. So as I'm speaking these out loud, if something rings with you, but you don't know exactly what it is, but it seems to ring with you, then there is something there. There is a connection there. So the four things, the four types of texts that we publish are sacred texts, So new sacred texts, right, that are coming through. Practical mysticism. And by that I mean, by practical mysticism, I mean um, that attunement, if you have attunement to the beyond, right, to those realms that are beyond kind of our five senses, right, those other senses, and you have those kind of mystical capacities, right, what I'm looking for in this is the ways that those mystical capacities, the ways that you work with them to shape your life in the physical world. So a lot of what this is bringing through all these things that we know, right, even though they exist beyond maybe what our physical world tells us, right? I'm really looking for the ways that this shapes your own consciousness, your own body, your own life, right? So that's why I call it practical mysticism. And side note, there is a book called Practical Mysticism that's really, really good. And it was published, I think, in the 1800s in England. Or, no, it was published right before or right around World War One in England. And this book, this text just came out. And so, but I really liked that phrase, practical mysticism, right? How do we work with mysticism, with those gifts of mysticism in our daily lives, in every moment that we live here? Because ultimately I become more and more aware that it's not separate. So that's a side note on why I added the word practical to mysticism. Spiritual technology. So a quick example of that, my first book, The New Eden Paradise Retold, has a series of 8 shamanic journeys, and those are powerful visions that I received that are designed to shift and heal and clear the subconscious. And because they're kind of designed to work in that way, I call it kind of it could be called a spiritual technology, a new pathway of embodying, accessing those higher levels of consciousness that want to come through, that are around us at all times. So spiritual technology, that again is broadly open to interpretation. So if you have something you believe, that light technology, I've heard it called, anything like that, we publish that. And that can also take the form of recordings, music, any of those things, like lots of different types of media. It doesn't just have to be the written word. And then stories of the new humanity. So this is, the stories of the new humanity are, recently last year I published a memoir, and it was mystical, but it was also an example of a story of kind of the ways that this new consciousness is embodying in me as a human on Earth. And so I wanted to include stories of the new humanity because that could be a more grounded approach. If you are rewriting your own story and healing through rewriting your own story by accessing empowerment and self-love, and you are there's a technology called reversing that I've talked about, and if you're going back and you're taking all of the those layered karmic kind of stories of judgment and criticism and blame and victimhood, and you're going back and rewriting it as a story of empowerment and truth and divine connection and healing, right? That is also something that Books of Eden will publish, because that's a really grounded way to show how this new consciousness is moving in the world through you as a person, right? So if you're like, I'm not a psychic, I don't know what mysticism is, but I do have this really powerful story of healing my past, that is very much something that I'm interested in publishing and putting in the world. And as I've mentioned, I define healing as irreversible transformation. So something, not just a palliative, something that you would take or that shifts you for a moment, but something that irreversibly changes the way you look at the world, you see the world, you move in the world. bringing you into that kind of higher plane of knowing and higher plane of consciousness. So that's how I define healing. So those stories of the new humanity are really can often be stories of deep healing. And so just a quick kind of recap already, because I feel like I just threw a lot out there. I am throwing open the doors of Books of Eden. If you're listening to this and you have a sacred text in you, or you have an example or a story of practical mysticism or spiritual technology or a story of the new humanity that is living within you, and this is sparking something in you, I am now opening Books of Eden to be publishing new authors. And and as I said, the authentic visionaries, oracles, seers of the new earth that is dawning. And that is just something I'm so excited to finally say, because it's been a long time coming. And the question that I wanted to answer in this podcast episode is, why now? Right? So I founded this company 3 to 4 years ago. Right? I got the vision for it far before then. Why now are the doors being thrown open for this communion, this co-creation, this collaboration? I think that's a little redundant, but collaboration with other visionaries. And there's two things that nudged me to make this announcement now. And one of them is I just listened to a talk by Richard Rudd, who gave a live talk in London a couple of days ago. And I've mentioned him a few times. He's the author of the Gene Keys, and also like a teacher, a mystic, a writer, right? Who runs what I believe is a very powerful example of a new model of a company that is running with the integrity of the higher consciousness that's coming in, even as it wrestles with kind of the old systems that are still in place, right? So I very much listen when he speaks. And so he had a talk the other day in London where he talked about this prophecy of 2027. And essentially, and I'm not, if you want to listen to the talk, I think you can still access it, but I'm just going to give kind of how I reflected, how I contemplated on how that talk affected me. And so essentially he talked about how 2027, there's this prophecy of what he calls the Great Change. And I have a side note there because I actually, in my first book, The New Eden, Paradise Retold, also talked about what I called the Great Change. And this was before I'd ever heard anyone else use that phrase. So there was some sort of confluence there. This kind of knowing that was rippling through like the spiritus mundi of human consciousness. So I called it the Great Change in my book, The New Eden, Paradise Retold. So when I heard him say that, it felt very, it felt prophetic because I had experienced it. And so he was articulating this. And so he's talking about this great change that's going to be rippling through humanity. And it's really, and I believe it's been happening for those of us we would call the way showers. Like many of us are called way showers, or, we've been kind of experiencing this, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Many of us, and especially if you're listening to this and this is resonating, you have experienced this great change already, or you are in the midst of experiencing it. And it has made nothing make sense. Most likely, if you're anything like me, what happened was you experienced this, something shifted in you, it was irrevocable, and suddenly the rest of the world stopped making sense. And that is, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but that was kind of, some of us have we've been kind of some of the early experiencers, for whatever reason, of this great change that's been occurring. And maybe we spent some time being extremely bewildered about who we were and what our role is in the world, why nothing seemed to fit, why we didn't seem to fit. And I know I talked about that in an episode a while ago, like maybe we're not supposed to fit. And so this helped put some pieces together for me. So Richard Rudd is talking about a dramatic shift that's happening at the level of human genetics. A shift, a dramatic shift in human evolution that's happening at the level of genetics that is the beginning of a new era. And he gave a lot of background around the yugas and the Kali Yuga and the 12,000 year I believe it's 12,000 year cycles of the earth. And so if you're interested in all that, he gives some background on that. But the cogent thing is that starting in 2027, there's going to be a massive acceleration of this incoming consciousness. And one of the things that I talked about in my first book, so a lot of this is helping my first book make sense, because as I was writing it, there's a part of me that thought, what am I saying? Like how, because I was writing it before I saw it in the world around me. And that's one of the reasons I had to live in complete solitude for a few years, because I had to bring it forward from within, because there was nothing around me. And if you're, by the way, if you're a writer of the New Earth, if you're a visionary of the New Earth, this is going to sound familiar, that nothing on the outside can tell you what's going on. It's really something you need to tune into from within. It's coming from that deep wisdom within, that deep embodied wisdom. So if what I'm saying sounds familiar, welcome. I'm just so glad to know that there's other people in the club. But so where was I? So there's this shift happening, huge, massive shift in human consciousness. And it is, the way I see it, the way I experienced it, so I can talk about it through my own personal experience, is the inflowing of a much higher level of consciousness. And it's an obliterating consciousness, I discovered, because it completely wiped out so many of the layers of illusion that I'd been living within about who I was, what would make me happy, essentially all the things I'd been told. And this consciousness came in, and for me it was during a healing ceremony, literally happened overnight. And I talk about this again in my first book and in my second book, how this consciousness flowed in, and just from that, literally overnight, I was a different person. I was more me than I'd ever been, but the life I had crafted for myself stopped making sense, and I entered a very long dark night of the soul. It felt very long. It was at least 5 years of trying to figure out what had happened to me, and that took me all over the world. 2 books came out of it, all sorts of mystics and healing and different healing modalities. I was trying to find anything that would help me make sense of this. And this is kind of the crux of what I'm saying, is that if on a larger scale, humanity is going to begin to experience this great change, we can prepare for massive bewilderment and massive confusion. Because when it happened to me individually, there was nothing in the mainstream consciousness that could help me make sense of it. How do I explain to anyone that I'm beginning to hear the voices of angels? How do I explain to anyone that I'm beginning to see miracles happen around me? How do I explain to anyone that I no longer have any desire to amass the kinds of material? It's not that I have no desire for it, but suddenly, like, my priorities shifted. I needed to follow the magic. And I couldn't do that in the frameworks that had existed for what a normal life is. So I really had to go off the map to figure it out. It was very scary. It was very bewildering, and I felt very alone most of the time. I had to be, because other people just confused me, because they would try to tell me things from their own, whatever their own perspective was, that didn't have anything to do with the consciousness that I was perceiving and receiving and becoming. And so if you're listening to this, if this is making sense to you, if you're saying, wow, there was someone else who that, and obviously we all had our own pathways to this. This was my personal experience. It was very intense and dramatic, but some of us may have had a more gentle approach. But what I'm trying to say is that those of us who have gone through it early, the way showers, who I'm referring to as the visionaries of the new earth, right? We have had to, by necessity, develop different tools of understanding, different ways of making sense of what had happened to us. And I'm calling these articulated pathways of integration. And a lot of what so coming back to Books of Eden, we're about to have on our hands a massive shift in consciousness that is going to be very bewildering, confusing, and for many people very scary. Because none of the tools we have, and I love the way Richard Rudd talked about it. He talked about as many of the left brain tools that we've developed, which is important, but they're not, and they can't explain what is happening. The left brain, rational, linear, very science-based, data-based models, they cannot help us navigate this new level of consciousness that is upon us. Which is why I'm opening the doors now. Because if you are an embodied dreamer of the new earth, a visionary of the new earth, what you have within you is an articulated pathway to help others navigate this entirely new way of being that is about to become very present in humanity. And Richard Rudd talked about kind of opening up the right brain, right? Intuition, image, feeling, connection, co-creation, the opening of the heart, the interconnection of the heart, the opening up of those pathways. We don't have very good tools in our culture for navigating this yet, right? But if you have experienced these shifts in consciousness, if you've developed stories, new sacred texts, new articulated pathways, they are needed now. They're needed now. So there was one other experience I had to really help me understand why this is so vital, so critical for right now. And I was rereading a book that had come into my hands. Someone recommended it to me, and I absolutely adore this book. It's called Courting the Wild Twin. It's by Martin Shaw. And I highly recommend this book. This man, he speaks in that poet, legend, myth, archetypal knowing. He's a storyteller and a poet. And he brings forward these myths in a way that allows them to be so present and so cogent in our world. And he tackled in this book, and this is a very clear kind of connection, he tackled climate change. And so did Richard Rudd, also talked about climate change. And what I loved about Martin Shaw's approach to this was he talked about, and it kind of worked on me because I didn't quite understand it at first, but then it just worked on me, and suddenly something clicked. And he talked about how climate change is so massive that it's not actually calling for a practical approach. There's something transcendent that we need to tap into to be able to navigate what's happening on our earth, on our planet. And then I connected that to the great change in 2027, and I began to understand that we have kind of a primary way in our culture. We give primacy to science and technology and that left brain, linear rational ways of explaining the world. And what's happening, those aren't big enough, right? In many ways, we distrust, in our culture, we distrust the wisdom of intuition, that feminine knowing of the heart. And we distrust it because it's not logical, right? I could talk, I think I've had episodes about this, but I had to go through a huge process of uncovering and healing the contempt that I had been, when I was very constricted for a long time, but I also developed those ways of speaking, like I have my PhD, I have peer-reviewed articles, I could speak in that way. I can swim in data, I can make sense of it. I can gather data, I can analyze it, I can do all those things. It never fulfilled me. And what ended up happening when I began tapping into this higher consciousness was I encountered a wall of contempt for the feminine. I had relegated the feminine to something useless and weak inside of me. And I believe that that is an unconscious bias of our culture. That wasn't mine. That was there for me to uncover and understand and work through and heal, and I'm still healing it in many ways. But it wasn't just mine. I understood that this was a collective block to the power and the wisdom of, some people call it yin, some people call it feminine, right? But if we're gonna look at that, we don't give primacy to intuition. We don't give primacy to interconnected heart wisdom, to gentleness, to there's this and it's more and more it is becoming more and more developed in our consciousness, but overall I wouldn't say that it's the leading way of being in the world, of our systems, of the things that govern our world. The feminine, intuitive, heart wisdom, interconnection, some people call it a synarchy, right? The way of co-creation. It's not, we're all are equal and equally heard and equally revered, right? That's definitely not yet present. So in order for me to really embrace that, and I feel like, let me bring it back. So in order for me to really embrace that, I had to heal a lot of contempt for that whole feminine aspect, those feminine aspects, the constellation of feminine ways. And I'm calling it feminine. Like I said, there's lots of different ways to look at it. Some people prefer yin or the yin way, which I like to say the yin is not passive. It's surrendered. It's receptive, but it's not passive. There's a power to it. So I had to really discover what that power was and how to embrace it in a world that didn't validate that, right? And that was a huge shift for me. So anyway, coming back, so Martin Shaw talks about climate change and how the ways of science, the practical ways, the technological ways are not going to be enough for us to navigate this. And it really helped me understand the role that Books of Eden can play in the world, because the ways that we are going to navigate the huge change that's upon us in consciousness, in our planet, right? It's through that embodied wisdom. It's through pathways of articulation of this higher consciousness to come in and be lived through us, for us to ascend, really. And I know Richard Rudd likes to talk about involution, right? There's involution as well, where that higher consciousness comes in, and there's evolution, where you move upwards. So it's kind of both at once, that kind of toroidal field. But we need those visionaries, those seers, those oracles who have experienced this within themselves and can offer different ways for us to navigate. So this is the role of the seer, the storyteller, the myth, the new stories that are arising for humanity, the poet. Can you imagine if the poet was the one leading us now? In order for those ways of seeing and knowing the world to receive primacy, we need to begin validating it within ourselves. Validating the poet's perspective as a powerful way of navigating the world and seeing the world, not just as a kind of extra fluff, or that would be nice, or I don't know. If I used to be an English teacher, and the poetry units were always kind of that, like, oh, we'll just do this when all the real work is done. Like, oh, once the tests are over, we'll start looking at poetry. And it was this kind of, it was always just kind of an optional side thing, because it wasn't grounded in rational data and informative didactic knowing, right? And so just there was no primacy given to that way. And in order for us to begin allowing that to take a greater and greater influence in our world, we need to validate that aspect within ourselves. If you are a poet, if you are a seer, if you are a visionary, that is what is needed now. And you might not get immediate validation from the rest of the world, because we will probably, many of us will still be trying to figure out, solve, fix things from that level of didactic knowing, science, technology, right? There's a place for that, but it can't be the primary way that we navigate this change, because the tool, it doesn't, the scope of the tool isn't enough, right? It doesn't have the scope that we need. We need the storyteller, we need the poet, we need the visionary, the seer, the oracle. And we need these to be brought through by people who have embodied it themselves and are living it, And these are, if this is resonating with you, right, this is the vision of Books of Eden Publishing, to allow those pathways to be articulated through our work, so that others in that bewilderment, right, going all the way back, I didn't find what I needed in science or technology, or even though I've had great experiences with therapy could not help explain the mystical experiences I was having, right? There was something else I needed, and I went all over trying to figure out, and I eventually articulated these pathways from within. And this is what I'm trying to say, is that we can be the ones to catch others as they begin to experience this great change, these shifts. Our books, our work, our messages, our visions are all going to be places where they can find resonance with what's happening in them. So this is the time of the authentic visionary to arise and start speaking, because humanity is undergoing a shift in consciousness that is irreversible, and that will require the strong and embodied wayshowers to help navigate these changes, the kinds of tools that are beyond anything that exists right now. We're creating them, we're bringing them forward. So I invite you to join me in that. So, okay, let me just skim real quick. This has been the 28th episode of When the Heart Leads, Visionaries of the New Earth. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Newborough, founder of Books of Eden Publishing, and I'm inviting you into this vision of creating these articulated pathways for people to walk through the bewildering changes. They're about to be upon us. We've been through it, and we know. We know how to give our gifts now. It's time. It's time. So, again, if you'd like to work with me, go ahead and reach out. You can find more information on my website, booksofeden.com. And I suggest signing up for the newsletter because I will be using that more and more as a vehicle for communicating updates, opportunities, new releases. I have a vision of a summit, a virtual summit and or in-person summit where visionaries of the new earth can come together, authors of the new earth can come together. All of that I'm going to start communicating through my newsletter. So I really want to be working with the people who are intentionally connected. So I suggest I'm also offering through there exclusively new kind of nervous system resets, healing visions, short 5 to 10 minutes. And I'm offering those through there as well that I'm not offering anywhere else. So booksofeden.com, reach out if this sounds like something you want to talk more about. I am here. I'm very excited to be throwing open the doors to Books of Eden Publishing, to you visionaries of the new earth who want to step in and work with me on collaboration, co-creation, these new articulated pathways of consciousness, of ascension for humanity. So, wow, what an episode. I'm so excited for everything that is happening and that we can create together. So again, Visionaries of the New Earth, 28th episode of When the Heart Leads. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Newbrough. Such a pleasure to connect with you across time and space, and I feel like this is just the beginning of our conversation. From my heart to yours, till next time.